This Day in Sports History. This episode is brought to you by Stirling Soap Company. Fellas, you've heard the phrase, look good, feel good, right? But why not add smell good to that too? That's where Stirling Soap Company comes in. First, Stirling Soap is 100% natural and has a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne. Second, there's a scent just for you. How about Burgundy? Yeah, it's more than a color. The Stirling Soap folks blend natural essential oils with hints of mahogany, golden amber, and sandalwood. Or how about D503, an intensely masculine scent inspired by Legend by Mont Blanc. And third, you will feel good about the price. For just a little more than you'd pay at the grocery store, Stirling Soap will leave you feeling clean, refreshed, and ready for whatever's next. Give Stirling Soap a try today. Visit stirlingsoap.com. Welcome back to another edition of This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. More info and more podcasts at sportshistorynetwork.com. It's January 15th, and on this day in 1967, it was the first Super Bowl. Well, actually, it wasn't called the Super Bowl just yet. It was called the AFL-NFL World Championship Game, and it featured the NFL champion Green Bay Packers and the AFL champion Kansas City Chiefs. The merger had been announced and planned, but both leagues being under the same umbrella was still a couple of years away. But since they'd decided to merge together, they might as well get to know each other and play a game. So they didn't really like each other. They'd been rivals since the AFL came into existence in 1960, fighting over college players and coaches, and that added to the pressure of winning this game. The Packers were a 12-win team, the Chiefs had won 11 and tied another one. The game was played in the LA Coliseum, and Green Bay was a 2-touchdown favorite. It was close through the first half, with the Packers leading 14-10. But in the third quarter, the Packer defense turned the momentum completely in their favor. Here's Jim Simpson calling the action for NBC that day.
Dawson being rushed and throws. It is intercepted. And down the sidelines comes Willie Wood. Only one man can get him at the 10 and drags him down at the 4-yard line. A big break. Mike Garrett.
The Packers scored on the next play, the first of what would be 21 unanswered points, and what would eventually be a 35-10 dominating win for the NFL representative. Now, interesting thing about the audio I just used, both NBC and CBS broadcast this game that day. It is the only time that the Super Bowl was carried by two of the big three networks. But NBC and CBS both destroyed the tapes of the game, not realizing the historical significance of it. But over the course of decades, pieces of footage were discovered in archives and attics, and when the game had been gathered together, NFL Films took over and restored the film and then added NBC's audio. On this day in 1997, Dennis Rodman kicked a courtside cameraman. The Bulls were on the road at Minnesota and in the middle of a win streak. Now, Chicago had never lost to the T-Wolves, who had been around for 8 years by this point. But in the fourth quarter, Minnesota had fought back from an 8-point halftime deficit to tie it up. When Tom Gugliotta missed his second free throw, Rodman and Kevin Garnett went after the rebound. Dennis tipped it out of bounds into the first row of seats, and then he went into a row of courtside photographers. Now, with the Bulls in town, it was a packed inline. Rodman stepped on one of the still photographer's feet, twisted his ankle, and he fell to the floor. As the in-arena video guy turned to get a shot of Dennis, Rodman kicked the underside of the guy's leg. Now, the camera guy crumpled to the floor. The guy that Rodman kicked was not the guy that he tripped over, though. The guy he kicked was Eugene Amos, and as he lay on the baseline in apparent pain, players looked on with a bit of disbelief, but the official called over medical personnel to take a look at him. After a 15-minute delay, Amos was put on a hard wooden board and carried off the floor. Rodman, on the other hand, was just fine. There was not a tech handed out, and he stayed in the game, and he finished with 6 points and 15 rebounds. The Bulls took back control of the game and they won 112-102. The immediate reaction from the announcers during the game, and even Phil Jackson after the game, was that Amos was not as injured as he may have looked, and he may just have had an ulterior motive.
And, Dennis has had that confrontation before in the playoffs last year where there was an incident where he broke a camera by, hitting it with a ball. And I don't know what happened there, but it looked like he kicked the guy. He kicked the guy in the knee, and the guy suddenly got, falsetto. I don't know how it happened, and it was down at his knee, and it ended up in falsetto. But Dennis come back, and they said, "Dennis, did you do that on purpose?" And he said, he tripped me up on the thing. He said, I kicked him right above the knee. And I said, well.
But Commissioner David Stern took a bit harsher look at Rodman's reaction, fining him $25,000 and then suspended him for 11 games. But Dennis was not done paying for his kick just yet. Rodman and Amos settled out of court for $200,000 a few weeks later. Now here's a little interesting addendum to the story. The day before the Rodman incident, Amos's girlfriend had filed a domestic assault report against Amos and obtained a restraining order against him. A little over a month later, Amos was arrested by Minneapolis police for threatening to harm her. Now, in a court of law, those two things would be, unrelated, but in the court of public opinion, it does shine a little bit of light on what may have truly happened on this night in Minnesota. How about another game that involved the Chicago Bulls? On this day in 1990, Trent Tucker's game-winning shot changed the rules of basketball. This was a matchup between the Bulls and the New York Knicks at Madison Square Garden. The game was tied, and there was 1/10 of a second showing on the clock. Out of a timeout, the Knicks were inbounding the ball in front of their bench.
Jackson looking for Ewing. Tucker launches it. It's good! It's good! Yes, it is possible to shoot with 1/10 of a second left.
Well, it is if the clock operator starts the clock late, but a couple of things here. This was the first season that the NBA game clock was using tenths of seconds. The Knicks' Mark Jackson inbounded the ball to Trent Tucker directly in front of him, who then turned and fired a three. Just after the horn sounded and the clock hit zero, the high arcing shot dropped through the net, and the Knicks celebrated the game winner and then sprinted to the locker room with the 109-106 victory. Bulls head coach Phil Jackson was not happy, saying you can't shoot a shot in that amount of time. And of course, he's correct. The clock operator did start the clock late, which allowed for the additional time for Tucker to launch the shot. The Bulls protested the official's decision to allow the bucket, but while Commissioner David Stern agreed with Jackson and the Bulls that the shot should not have counted, he denied the protest, and the result stood as a Knicks 3-point win. What resulted was the Trent Tucker Rule, which in essence says that you cannot catch and shoot with less than 0.3 of a second on the clock. It has to be a tip-in or a dunk. And that's the direct result of what happened on this day in 1990. And on this day in 1878, Harvard's Fred Thayer applied for a patent for the first baseball catcher's mask. It's kind of hard to imagine that baseball had been going on for about a quarter of a century by this point, and yet the guys behind the plate still did not have something protecting their face. Thayer came to Harvard in 1874 as a student to play football, and then he took over as manager for the Crimson baseball team. His catcher, Jim Ting, was routinely getting hit in the head with fastballs and curveballs. Balls in the dirt would pop up and smack Ting in the face. So Thayer, a bit of a tinkerer, started to think about how to solve this problem. He'd done a little fencing and thought about the mask that fencers wear to protect their face. Maybe that could be modified. So he went to a local metalsmith and he told him about his idea to come up with a cage to cover the player's face with padding on the forehead and the chin. So they refashioned one of those fencer's masks and worked with it a little bit more, coming up with a workable prototype that debuted on April 12, 1877. And it worked. So Thayer and his metalsmith partner started working on a few more, and other catchers started to see the value in protecting their faces, and they wanted one. Realizing he had something special, he applied for his patent to protect his invention, and it's a good thing he did. Thayer's face mask showed up in the Spalding catalog later in 1878, but Spalding was not passing along any royalties or residuals to Thayer. When Thayer realized that Spalding was, in essence, stealing from him, he sued and he won. A judge in 1883 awarded Thayer a nice, hefty sum for the invention he smartly patented on this day in 1878. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. The Formosan rock monkey has been a bane in the existence of coffee farmers in Taiwan. The monkeys pick the coffee cherry off the plants and suck on it for a little coffee buzz, and then they spit out the actual bean. The farmers found that brewing the monkey-sucked beans brewed a mellow, vanilla-tasting drink.
What did you say?
So, they started using the spit-out beans.
What you talking about, Willis?
The problem is that supply can be a bit hit and miss, and the price of monkey spit coffee is about $60 a pound. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.